So it has been over a month since I received an email from Venerable Rinchen. To be exact, it was on June 4th that she sent an email saying, Gisela, I saw this video and wondered if you might be able to summarize it, such as in a BBC for the community. The topic of meditative practice of setting cognitive decline has come up recently, so I think many would be interested in the topic. With that, she sent me a link to a YouTube video, which happened to be a Voice of Tibet radio program sponsored by, I think, Norway government. But this radio program staff and office is, I think that might be the main office located in Dharamsala. So what that radio program turned out to be was an interview with two Tibetans doctorates. One is Dr. Tenzin Namdul, and then the other Dr. Tenzin Pasang. So Dr. Tenzin Namdul, he is an associate professor at the University of Minnesota, and he is also an assistant director of the Beacon Center of Spirituality and Healing, and director of the Beacon Center for Tibetan Healing Program. I think both of them in Minnesota. He was a PhD in medical, he is a PhD in medical anthropology that he did from Emory University when we were there together. And he's also an MD in Tibetan medical sciences from Mensikang, Dharamsala. So after doing his PhD, he got posted in Minnesota University, where he's undertaking these researches as well as teaching programs, I think. Then the other one is Tenzin Pasang, Dr. Tenzin Pasang, who has a PhD in physics from Mysore University, India. And he has experience in working at Perth University, Australia. And he is currently the director of Drepung Losiling Science and Meditation Center since 2017. He was also one of the founders of Tibetan Scientific Society in 2010. So what that interview centered on was not research, epidemiological study that is being undertaken in the Tibetan monastic communities in South India, in all of the 6 main monastic universities of Gelug tradition, namely 2 colleges within Drepung, which are Gomang and Losiling, 2 colleges within Ganden, Shatse and Changse, and 2 colleges within Sera, Je and Me. So they are undertaking an epidemiological study. So he was making this, emphasizing this, that this was just an epidemiological study, not a regular research, which would involve having test group and a control group. But this was an epidemiological study where mainly they were looking at the prevalence of a particular disorder in a particular community. And this disorder that they are looking into happens to be Alzheimer's disease. Together with, associated with that was also one of the focus was to look into cognitive impairment in the members of the community. So how they got this inspiration was, there was a peer review article on a similar study done in Tibet. And this article came out in 2016, where they showed that there was a lower prevalence of Alzheimer's disease among Tibetans, not necessarily specifically monks and nuns, but Tibetans within the Shanghai area. of Tibetan plateau, and they were seeing associations with religious and genetic factors in that. So they saw very low prevalence. Actually, they saw 1.33%, as opposed to uh, places like sub as opposed to places like Latin America, where the percentage is much higher, 8.5, and that of sub-Saharan African regions, 2 to 4%, but 1.33 is very low. And so, so this peer review article came, and that kind of alerted to this area that they wanted to look deeper into, and also see some prospects of some kind of a preventative interventions that might be proposed or built, developed. So that's why two professors from the US, one by the name of Dr. Richard, Richard, Dr. Richard McLehouse, and another from he's from University of Minnesota, and then Dr. Dedra Buchwald from the Washington State University. They took notice of this report, and they were interested in uh, looking into this much deeper, into a similar setting. By the way, these two professors were part of the Science for Monks program, very similar to the Emerald Tibet Science Initiative. And they were doing their summer intensives in Sikkim, where they again presented this case of Alzheimer's disease being prevalent in the West, and 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 thus wondered what was the response from the monks and nuns studying under them. They were surprised to find that they didn't even know that such an illness happens, and and there were hardly any cases of elder people having this problem. And that kind of coincided with what the finding was in Tibet, and they wanted to really pursue this, but they could not think of doing it in Tibet because of the logistics and the whatnot. So they eventually approached the administrators and abbots of the monasteries in South India and offered to do this research, offered to do this study, carry out this study, but wanted to know if the monasteries were willing to cooperate, because basically they would be providing the subjects for this, as well as they would need on-site investigators to help out with this. So in 2018, around 2018, they checked with the monasteries administrators and the abbots and whatnot, and they all agreed to do that. And from then on, for the next 2 years, up until 2020, they were really engaged in brainstorming how to go about doing this and how to cultivate on-site investigators. But luckily, they had lots of monks and nuns who were trained in the science program through Emerald Tibet Science Initiative, as well as Science for Monks, and I think Science Meets Dharma also. So, and then there were many in each of these sites, monastic sites in South India, where several of the Tenzin Gyatso science scholars who have had immersive experience in Emory, at least 2 years each of immersive experience in the university setting with lab work, etc. So they could employ them. They could kind of get them involved into this. So that's how they went through training of the investigators, and that's how since then they've been pursuing this. But before, so the interview was mainly about the findings of this study and how they carried it out, how they trained, and what was the nature of the survey and the result also. So that was the main theme of the interview. But before I move into this, I want to give you a little background idea about Alzheimer's disease. I didn't do much reading around it. I just listened to the interview because I'm presenting the summary of the interview. So I should be kind of conveying verbatim to the extent possible what they were saying. So mainly Tenzin Namdul, who was one of the principal investigators, he joined the group of these two other professors in 2020. And since then, this really picked up momentum, and he was very instrumental in getting it going to the recent uh, uh, time when they disclosed the initial finding in March 2023. So before I give the spoiler on the result, I want to take some time in giving the background. So this doctor, Tenzin Namdul, he was saying that with age, our body declines. And because of that, brain parts such as the central and peripheral nervous systems are affected. So it's quite usual, natural for people to undergo, experience some loss of memory, which are very natural, such as having difficulty finding the right word, or sometimes not knowing where they kept the key, etc., etc. But those are not considered uh, uh, the actual symptoms of this disease necessarily related to Alzheimer's disease. So even in accordance with the SORI, but it is the Tibetan medical system. And he says that with age, the Tibetan medical outlook is that with age, people, unless they take special measures, they are more prone to uh, becoming lung affected, lung affected, lung disorder, which is more related to stress, anxiety, like that. And thus, people are no more natural to become anxious and see frequent shifts in moods, whatnot. Uh, but then, from the Tibetan medical system, if you look at the Alzheimer's disease in particular, the understanding is that it is most prevalent in elders, and it sets in around 20 years before actually producing symptoms. And that uh, process will include changes in the brain, such as brain parts shrinking, causing cognitive impairment, uh, old memories. By the way, in Alzheimer's disease, it seems like the old memories are not affected, but the current ones are. And current ones are, you remember things of the past, but not where you left the key 3 minutes back. And also one loses navigational skill, and it also weakens abstract thinking, mathematical skills. Uh, these symptoms may begin as small ones, but then they become progressive. And at present, there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease. Uh, so he, being trained both in the Western and Eastern medicine, as well as because of his work for his PhD degree, I think he has exposure to the Western medicines and Western medical understandings as well. So he says that when it progresses and becomes worse, one could even lose language and memories related to what I don't know what he meant by memories related to involuntary bodily functions. They also get affected. and that currently there is no cure available, and it's very cost intensive and taxing on the care system, family members, society, etc., etc. So currently in US there are 5 million people affected by it, and it is expected to increase to 14 million in 5 years. Part of the reason is people begin to live longer. And they say that particularly this Alzheimer's disease affects women as opposed to male, because they happen to live longer. And then in overall, we have very stressful lifestyles, and they kind of add to this problem. But the good news is just on July 6th, this past July 6th, His Holiness's birthday, the Food and Drug Administration fully approved the first drug shown to slow down Alzheimer's disease. And it's sold under the brand name Leqembi. This is the first time that a drug, meant to slow the disease's progression not only targets its symptoms has been that not only targets symptoms but also is effective in slowing the disease's progression. It has been granted full regulatory approval. So, in accordance with the dictionary, I don't know which dictionary, the Alzheimer's disease is defined as a common form of dementia of unknown cause. That's the reason why there is no cure. Usually beginning in late mid age, so that's indicative of 20 years in, in progress in making before it really sets off the symptoms. And it is characterized by progressive memory loss and mental deterioration associated with brain damage. So basically, it's this disease with brain damage causing it. So that's the scenario of Alzheimer's disease, and they wanted to really confirm what the finding was in Tibet. And but since they could not do it in Tibet, they then looked for a community which would most effectively match with the one there, and they decided to do it in South India in the monasteries. So then I shared how they went about this in the initial time, so initial stage of this, and that involved training the investigators on the site, and luckily they were able to engage many monks and nuns who have had exposure to modern science. Not only that, some have, say, like the Tenzin Gyatso science scholars trained in Emory University, they have even some exposure to lab work and also some scientific ways of undertaking surveys and interviews and whatnot. But then they were even given special trainings, and particularly they were given a background scenario of what's happening, what is being pursued here, what is the expected the process of it, and also what kind of a mindset they have to come up with, uh, and how do they present themselves in questioning, and how can they keep their biases, prejudices away from the process so that it could be as objective as possible. And they even followed RBI protocol, something like that. So the research, or they call it research cycle, but they are calling it the epidemiological study. And in their abstract, they are calling it physical and cognitive resilience and Alzheimer's disease in Tibetan Buddhist monastic community. And as I said, that the principal investigators of this were first the two Westerners, one from Washington State University and the other from Minnesota University. But later, after Dr. Tenzin Namdul graduated or finished his PhD from Emory University, he went back to Minnesota, and that's where he got a job, and they kind of linked, and he happened to be part of this team since 2020 and taking a very lead role in this. In terms of the subjects, initially the idea was to get 400 people interviewed and whatnot, but I think they seem to have, yeah, on the ground gotten 206 senior monks from age 50 onward. In Tibet, what they did was subjects who were age 60 and beyond, but they decided to do it from age 50 onward, and they did that in the 6 monastic colleges within Sera, Ganden, and Depung. So in terms of the methods they employed, they really undertook thorough interview and also collected biospecimens, urine, saliva, and also to get, I think, genetic sample, and also the MRIs on them. They looked into their daily practice, conducts, habits, practices, etc. And as I said earlier, this was meant to be an epidemiological study, mainly in interest in seeing the presence or not, if so, how prevalent, and what are the, what do you call, associated factors that may be contributing to whatever the finding is. So there was no experiment and control group. And then, so from 2020, it really took off after the initial long time of really brainstorming the process and training the on-site investigators. So in the last little over 2 years, they then collected the preliminary results and they announced it in a formal ceremony in March 19, 2023. Of course, they were cautious not to run to conclusions. Both the sides exercise restraint, but they were really upbeat with the finding. Because the surprise was, from the subjects in Ganden and Drepung, there was not a single case of Alzheimer's disease. Despite the fact that there were many metabolic disorders prevalent among the people, such as diabetes, heart disease, obesity, they were very prevalent, quite prevalent. So from a comorbidity scenario point of view, the subjects were really suggestive of the presence of Alzheimer's disease because of the prevalence of the risk factors associated with that. But despite this, not a single case of Alzheimer's disease they found. And so when they say Ganden and Depung, this leaves only Sera, so that the very few cases. I think although in their report it doesn't suggest what percentage they found it. I think they even said that it's almost safe to say that there is no case. So maybe there was one or two, maybe. So it was almost safe to say that there was no case of Alzheimer's disease in the subjects that they covered. But that was a surprise. So although there's a lot more to do than they have achieved so far, because now the main work of really sorting through the findings and then finding some kind of hopefully some kind of a non-pharmacological intervention, which could be then translatable to other communities of any background. That's the main theme, and so the main investigators are also kind of asking people for patience and also more commitment to kind of proceed through the process until they get to that level, and not to jump to any conclusions in terms of what could be contributing to this, etc. But nonetheless, they were curious about what people's hypothesis might be in terms of why this is so, despite the prevalence of the risk factors. So hypothesis for the result obtained was even from the investigators themselves, including Dr. Tenzin Namdul, one of the main principal investigators, was that the monks there are engaged in very long, lifelong study as students for around 25 to 26 years, and then thereafter many serve as teachers for as many years. And then their whole process of study, as well as their service in the monastery at different levels of responsibilities, involves memorization, such as in a posada or in certain kind of ceremonies, in certain annual and monthly, some kind of a monastic ceremonies. They are so much part of reciting by heart. So even when you are very senior, you are not exempt from that. You have to so 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 not just during the studies time, but even long after that, uh, many of the responsibilities involve memorizing things and be able to deliver them, by heart on that side. And then, of course, the uh, mainstay of the study is through debating, which involves lots of engaging the brain. And then, of course, one is supposed to then reflect on uh, what the understandings are, what the findings are, what the understandings of the scriptures are, like that. And in many cases, many of them are found to spend their time hours of the mantra recitation because of their commitments from tantric initiations and whatnot, and then they do it in with great seriousness, presence, and focus. And then along with that, there are something reflections that go with that. So that also is a major kind of call on the brain to be active. And then overall, on top of all this, they emphasize the positive outlook. Many of these subjects are someone who had gone through several ups and downs in life, more particularly around 1959 when they had to leave the country and be kind of really reduced to just nothing, with, as the Tibetan saying goes, with nothing but sky and the earth as one's friends. So they had to go through such situations, but nonetheless, because of their uh, inclination to kind of look at things from a positive perspective, uh, many of them seem to really have a very strong level of resilience, and maybe to a great extent that's what may be contributing to these factors. So moving ahead, what the promises and challenges they have in before them, they also shared with this. So they are hopeful to develop a non-pharmacological intervention that could be proactive and multi-pronged program to combat similarly complicated problem of Alzheimer's disease. And in this respect, they see the monastic community, particularly the ones that they focus their subject investigation on, to be a very ideal place to undertake the research. But now that they found that there are very little or no case of Alzheimer's, despite the prevalence of the risk factors and etc., they found that the monastics community that they did the research on would be a very ideal place to uh, undertake further research into it, because there is, from a scientific point of view, less confounding factors. Too many variables would be an obstacle, right? But they have almost like a similar regimen for about everyone, with variations of what kind of meditation they do. But in terms of uh, general structure, it is very similar. And then the challenge is how to translate the finding to make them practicable to a larger audience, to kind of really filter the finding. And what is very promising from this, if they really succeed in coming up with a non-pharmacological intervention applicable to a wider uh, audience, would be that it involves perspective change, looking at things in a positive way, kind of as a way to remain healthy and successful in life, and that they seem to be a very strong point from this study, very promising in an overall impact on the society, on top of helping their health. And one thing very special is this kind of a study involves looking at daily habits, practices, customs, not so much into some kind of a researches where they have people do meditation, right? Which would be not that applicable and practicable to everyone, but something about how you uh, gear your lifestyle, how you look at things, and how you structure your day. Since that's what would come out from this, they find it to be very promising. So basically, they're saying that distilling the essence of the finding may take time and calls for patience from all the sides, but do think of the worthiness of such a measure for its benefit that it brings to a larger audience. And last but not the least, they say among the promises and challenges, great prospect of developing a preventative disease control model that also helps in improving basic human qualities. So that's what the research was about. Although I didn't get hold of the what they call the preliminary finding, but the result of that is very promising. Uh, but in terms of what were the factors associated with that, responsible for that, they have yet to brainstorm and figure out that. So that's a good news for them as well as for every one of us.